Late one evening, Alex was alone at home when he heard the distinct sound of the front door opening. Thinking it was his dad, he texted him, "Dad, is that you?" But the response he got sent chills down his spine. "What do you mean? I'm not home yet." Confused, Alex quickly typed back, telling his dad that someone had just entered the house. His father tried to reassure him, suggesting it was probably just his imagination, and explained that his car had broken down on the way home, though he'd managed to find a ride and would be home soon. Alex's relief was short-lived. A moment later, he saw something that left him paralyzed with fear. "Dad," he texted in a panic, "I just saw Caroline." His father's reply was filled with disbelief. "Caroline? As in your sister, Caroline?" Alex confirmed it. He swore he'd just seen his sister, though she had died in a car accident with their mother. Even more unsettling, Caroline had whispered to him that she wanted to take him to their mother. "That's impossible," his father replied, now genuinely terrified. "Your mom and your sister are gone. It couldn't have been her." He told Alex to lock himself in his room until he got home. After several anxious moments, Alex confirmed that he was safely in his room with the door locked. But their uneasy conversation didn't end there. A short time later, Alex texted again in a panic, "Dad, she's at the door." He could hear Caroline's voice, faint but insistent, urging him to come out, repeating that it was time to go. His father's next instructions were urgent and clear: "Cover your ears. Don't listen to her. Whoever that is, it's not your sister. Do not open that door." But as the moments ticked by, things only escalated. Caroline, or whatever it was outside his door, started twisting the doorknob, desperate to get in. Alex could hear her voice growing sharper, angrier, demanding he open up. Panic flooded Alex as he texted his dad one last time, letting him know she was now banging on the door, threatening to break it down if he didn't let her in. His dad was frantic, telling him to stay calm, that he was almost home, but no more replies came from Alex. When Alex's dad finally burst through the door minutes later, the house was eerily silent. He ran from room to room, calling his son's name, but there was no answer. In Alex's bedroom, he found the door unlocked, and on the bed, Alex's phone lay open, his last messages still displayed on the screen. But of Alex, there was no trace. He had vanished without a sound, as if he had simply been taken. Jenna was deep in sleep when she found herself pulled into a strange and vivid dream, one so lifelike that it felt as though it blurred the line between reality and imagination. In this dream, she was holding her phone, scrolling through messages like she normally would. Everything seemed normal at first, until she noticed a new message from an unknown number. Curiosity turned to unease as she opened it, and what she read chilled her to the core. The sender introduced itself as Death and stated, with unsettling certainty, that her time had come. It explained, in a matter-of-fact tone, that when it's someone's time to die, death appears to carry out the inevitable. The messages continued, cold and relentless, saying that by tomorrow morning, she would no longer wake up. She would be gone. At first, Jenna didn't take the messages seriously. She stared at her phone in disbelief, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. It had to be a joke. Some pathetic prankster, bored and trying to scare her for fun. She quickly typed back, her words sharp with anger. "Nice try, loser. You must be really bored to come up with something this lame. Go bother someone else." She decided to end the nonsense once and for all by blocking the number. But the moment she tried, her phone buzzed again. Another message appeared instantly, "You can't block me." The words felt heavier than they should have. Her eyes widened as she read the next line, "This isn't even real. You're still in bed, Jenna. You're asleep right now. But that doesn't matter, because by the time morning comes, you won't wake up. Your time is over." Her breath caught in her throat. The dream shifted from a strange annoyance to something darker, something she couldn't laugh off anymore. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen, trying to process what was happening. No, she thought, shaking her head. This can't be real. It's just a dream. Just a stupid dream. But the weight of the words on the screen didn't feel like a joke. Panic began to rise in her chest, her heartbeat thudding loudly in her ears. She started typing back, her fingers shaking as she poured out her fear in a series of frantic messages. No. This isn't happening. I can't die now, she wrote. Please, I'm too young. I have so much to do, so much to live for. What about my family? My mom and dad, they need me. My friends would be crushed. I haven't even started living yet. Please, I'm begging you. This can't be real. She hit send and stared at her phone, hoping for a response that would ease her growing terror. But when the reply came, it was short and final: it's time. Her chest tightened, and tears streamed down her face as the words echoed in her mind. It's time. The finality of it was unbearable. She tried everything she could think of to wake herself up, pinching her arms, slapping her face, yelling into the empty room, but nothing worked. She was trapped in this nightmare, forced to face the messages on her phone as they confirmed her worst fear. Her mind raced with thoughts of her family, her friends, her life. She wasn't ready to leave it all behind, not like this. The silence on the other end of the conversation felt crushing, like an invisible weight pressing down on her. No matter how much she begged or pleaded, there was no answer. No mercy. The hours dragged on, each moment stretching into an eternity. Then, as the first light of dawn crept through her window, the dream dissolved into nothingness. The phone slipped from her hand, and the strange, terrifying conversation disappeared with it. But Jenna didn't wake up. When her family entered her room later that morning, they found her lying peacefully in bed, as though she was simply sleeping. Her face was calm, her hands resting by her sides, and her phone sat untouched on her nightstand. Its screen was blank, showing no signs of the strange messages she had seen. To everyone else, it was as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Yet Jenna's life had quietly ended in the night, leaving her family and friends to mourn a loss they couldn't explain. Her death became a mystery, a haunting puzzle with no answers, one that would linger in their hearts forever. Emily was frantic when she texted her best friend one night, her fingers trembling as she typed out the words, "Help! Help! Help!" Her friend, initially alarmed, quickly asked, "What's wrong?" Emily's response was cryptic and chilling, "I think something is wrong with me." Her friend pressed for details, and Emily began to explain something that sounded impossible. She described waking up in places entirely different from where she had fallen asleep. The night before, for instance, she had gone to bed in her cozy apartment bedroom, but by morning, she found herself lying in the middle of a forest. Her friend laughed nervously, dismissing the story as a joke, but Emily insisted, her tone growing more desperate. "I'm serious. The first time it happened, I thought it was a prank, but now it happens every single night." Her friend, still trying to rationalize the situation, asked when it had all started. Emily paused, then replied that it began shortly after she moved into her new apartment. Maybe, her friend suggested, Emily was sleepwalking. It could even be that someone was sneaking in and moving her without her knowledge. But Emily shut down that idea immediately. "Why would someone kidnap me every night and just leave me in a forest?" she questioned, her voice tinged with fear. Her friend urged her to go to the police, but Emily explained she already had, and they, too, chalked it up to sleepwalking. Desperate for answers, her friend offered a practical solution: lock all the doors and windows that night, ensuring there was no way anyone, or anything, could get in or out. Emily agreed, hoping this would put an end to the bizarre occurrences. That night, Emily carefully locked every door and window in her apartment. She checked twice, even 3 times, to be certain there were no gaps, no open spaces. Feeling slightly reassured, she went to bed, clutching her phone tightly in case anything unusual happened. But the next morning, her heart sank. Once again, she woke up in the same forest. She immediately called her friend, who was stunned. "What? But didn't you lock everything?" her friend asked. Emily assured her friend she had. Every door and window had been sealed shut, and yet she still ended up outside, miles away, with no memory of how she got there. Her friend, now just as scared, suggested another plan. "Go to the supermarket and buy a CCTV camera. That way, we can figure out what's happening at night." Emily agreed it was a good idea and rushed to the store that day, desperate for answers. The next morning, Emily's friend waited anxiously for her update. When Emily finally messaged back, it sent chills down their spine. It happened again. This time, however, Emily had checked the footage. She described what she saw in shaky words: "Something or someone forced me out of the house." Her friend demanded to know more. Was she sleepwalking? Had someone broken in? Emily replied, "No. I was dragged out, forcefully. But it wasn't by a person. It looked like, I don't know, a shadow? A ghost?" Her friend couldn't believe it. Emily sent over the footage, and when her friend watched it, their blood ran cold. In the grainy black and white recording, Emily was seen lying peacefully in her bed. Then, out of nowhere, a dark, indistinct shape appeared in the room. It hovered over her for a moment before violently yanking her out of bed. Her limp body was dragged through the apartment and out the front door, even though every lock remained bolted. "Oh my God," her friend gasped. "And you don't remember any of it?" Emily confirmed she didn't. She had no memory of the figure, no recollection of being pulled out of her bed, nothing. As they tried to piece together the mystery, Emily's friend recalled something she had mentioned earlier, that all of this started when she moved into her new apartment. A terrible realization dawned on them, and Emily's friend typed out a frantic message: "Emily, pack your stuff and get out of that house. Get out right now." Emily didn't waste any time. That day, she packed her belongings and moved out, leaving the apartment, and its horrifying secrets, behind. Emily was babysitting one evening, a decision she made reluctantly while all her friends were out having fun at a birthday party. Although she desperately wanted to join them, she couldn't ignore her financial struggles and the promise of quick cash. The job offer had come from an old woman who had called her a few days prior. The pay was unusually high, $1,000 for just one night, which was enough to make Emily skeptical at first. She thought there must have been some mistake, especially when the woman explained that the child she needed Emily to babysit wasn't a child at all, but Isabel, her porcelain doll. The old woman insisted that Isabel wasn't just a doll but something much more precious. She was like a daughter to her. The bizarre nature of the request made Emily hesitate, but the thought of earning such a substantial amount of money for simply watching over a lifeless toy was too tempting to resist. After all, how hard could it be? Emily accepted the job, convincing herself it would be an easy and lucrative night. When the old woman left the house that evening, leaving Emily alone with the doll, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that lingered in the air. Isabel was placed carefully on the living room couch, its lifelike glass eyes staring straight ahead. Emily tried to ignore the unsettling sensation of being watched, chalking it up to her overactive imagination. Time passed slowly, and she distracted herself by scrolling through her phone and occasionally glancing at the doll to make sure it was still there. It always was, until it wasn't. The first odd occurrence happened when Emily left the doll on the couch and walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. When she returned, Isabel was no longer on the couch. Instead, she was lying on the floor, her glassy eyes now facing Emily. At first, Emily tried to rationalize it, telling herself that the doll must have fallen, even though it had been sitting upright and perfectly balanced just moments before. Brushing off her unease, she picked the doll up and returned it to the couch, determined not to let her imagination get the better of her. But as the night dragged on, things only got stranger. Every time Emily left the room, Isabel seemed to move. She would place the doll in one spot, only to find it somewhere else minutes later. Once, Emily left Isabel in the living room and went upstairs to check her phone charger, only to come back and find the doll sitting upright at the base of the staircase, as if it had been waiting for her. Her heartbeat quickened, and her mind raced to come up with a logical explanation. Was someone else in the house? No, she had locked all the doors after the old woman left. Maybe it was all some elaborate prank? But who would go to such lengths? Feeling uneasy and tired, Emily decided to put the doll in its designated room upstairs, hoping that keeping it out of sight would help ease her nerves. The room was small and eerie, decorated with antique furniture and lined with dusty shelves filled with other dolls, their unblinking eyes reflecting the dim light of the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Emily placed Isabel on the small bed in the corner and turned to leave, but the moment she stepped out of the room, the entire house was plunged into darkness. The lights had gone out completely, leaving her in pitch blackness. Panic began to creep in, and as she fumbled for her phone to use its flashlight, she froze in place. Through the silence of the house, she heard it, a soft, high-pitched giggle echoing from behind her. The sound sent chills down her spine, and she instinctively turned back toward the room. The laughter grew louder, unmistakably coming from Isabel. Emily's breath hitched as she realized the impossible: the doll was laughing. Terrified, she bolted down the stairs, her only thought being to get out of the house as quickly as possible. She reached the front door and pulled it open, but instead of stepping outside, she found herself back in the living room, facing Isabel, who now sat in the middle of the floor, her head tilted slightly to the side as if mocking her. Emily screamed and ran to another door, but no matter which exit she tried, she always ended up back in the same room with the doll. It was as if the house itself was alive, trapping her in an endless loop. She pounded on the walls, yelled for help, and tried every window, but nothing worked. She was trapped, with no way out. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. Emily turned toward it, her chest heaving with fear and exhaustion, hoping against hope that someone had come to save her. But standing in the doorway was the old woman, her silhouette illuminated by the moonlight outside. The old woman stepped inside slowly, her expression calm yet unnerving. She looked directly at Emily and smiled, a cold, unsettling smile that made Emily's stomach churn. "Welcome, dear," the old woman said in a soft yet sinister voice. "You're one of us now." Emily's blood ran cold as the weight of the words sank in. Whatever was happening, whatever this was, there was no escape. The realization hit her like a wave, and in that moment, she knew her fate was sealed. She was never leaving that house. Hannah had always considered her dreams as nothing more than random fragments of her imagination, until one day, they began to align with reality in unsettling ways. At first, the connections were small, almost inconsequential. She dreamt her mother was making pancakes for breakfast, and the next morning, the familiar aroma filled the house. Then she dreamt about Mrs. Patterson, their notoriously strict history teacher, canceling a test, something she never did. Yet, by the following day, the announcement had been made. Initially, Hannah tried to dismiss it. Surely, these were just coincidences, she told herself. But when she dreamt of a fire breaking out in the school cafeteria, and it actually happened, she could no longer deny that something strange was going on. Her dreams weren't just meaningless occurrences, they were warnings of events yet to come. One night, Unable to keep her fear bottled up any longer, Hannah confided in her best friend, Victoria. Explaining her dreams and how they were becoming reality was harder than she thought. Victoria, ever rational and grounded, tried to calm her, attributing it all to chance. "Dreams can be weird sometimes," she said, trying to reassure Hannah. But Hannah wasn't convinced. These weren't just random flashes of imagination, they felt real, too real. Victoria encouraged Hannah not to let her dreams get the best of her. The conversation ended with Victoria reminding her about the school road trip scheduled for the next day and asking if she would join them. But Hannah declined. The weight of her dreams was becoming too much, and she didn't trust herself to enjoy the trip. That night, Hannah couldn't shake the unease that gripped her. Despite her best efforts to stay awake, exhaustion eventually pulled her into sleep. The dream that followed was the clearest, most terrifying yet. She saw Victoria on the school bus, laughing and chatting with their classmates. Then, without warning, the bus spiraled out of control. The brakes failed, the driver panicked, and the bus careened off the road. Hannah woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing, the images seared into her mind. The moment she opened her eyes, she grabbed her phone and frantically texted Victoria. Her hands trembled as she typed, urging her friend not to go on the trip. Hannah's desperation grew with every second that passed. She tried to explain what she had seen, how Victoria was on the bus, how there was an accident, and how everyone was in danger. Her warnings were met with confusion and disbelief. Victoria, already on the road with her classmates, initially dismissed Hannah's frantic messages. But as the conversation continued, the seriousness of Hannah's tone began to unsettle her. Then, the unthinkable happened. The bus driver announced that the brakes had failed. Panic swept through the bus as Victoria messaged Hannah, now fully aware that her friend's dream was coming true. Hannah's fear turned to outright terror as Victoria's updates became more frantic. She pleaded with her friend to jump out, to get off the bus however she could. But then the messages stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a void filled only by the growing sense of dread in Hannah's chest. She continued to text, begging for a response, but nothing came. Later, the news confirmed what Hannah already knew deep in her heart. The school bus had crashed in a devastating accident, killing everyone on board, including Victoria. The grief was overwhelming, but what haunted Hannah the most was the knowledge that she had foreseen it. No matter how desperately she had tried to warn her friend, it hadn't been enough. From that day on, Hannah understood the curse she carried. Her dreams were not mere fantasies or random coincidences, they were glimpses into a future she couldn't change. And as much as she tried to ignore them, the weight of knowing, of seeing what was to come, became an unbearable burden.